Most disturbing, scary true stories. Story 1. Posted by Soup for Brunch. In 3rd grade, I had this strange short teacher named Mrs. Todd. She was always super nice to me in class. She'd always call on me to do the fun activities first, compliment me whenever I did something, and was generally just very positive toward me. At the time, I thought she was perhaps my favorite person in the world. I remember even telling my mother about how much I loved Mrs. Todd. Anyways, one day, I sat down at my desk and opened it up to put crap in it, when shockingly I saw that there was a Victoria's Secret magazine sitting in the pull-out drawer. The kid sitting next to me noticed how shocked I was. I thought I was going to get in trouble, and we started talking about how it might have gotten there. Almost immediately, Mrs. Todd walks up and asks, "What have you got there?" I was seriously confused and told her it was sitting on my desk when I got here this morning. Well, she looks at me and tells me that the kid sitting next to me must have put it there. She kept repeating that statement over and over again to both him and me until I finally admitted that I guess he could have put it there. Maybe a few days after that, she approached me after class to tell me about this special field trip I could go on if I kept doing good in class. It would be a trip with just her and I to the Gulf of Mexico for the weekend. I remember being really excited about it at the time. However, suddenly she got replaced at the school and we got this new teacher that didn't like me as much. I was so heartbroken at the time. It wasn't until many years later that I realized how fucked up that situation was. It scares me thinking about it still. Story 2. Posted by Consumptive Mary Jane. When I was 7 years old, I was walking to my babysitter's house all by myself. She only lived a block from the schoolyard. I'd done it all the time. This car pulls up beside me on the road, and the driver keeps gesturing to me to come closer and shouting, "Come here. Come here." I'm frozen on the sidewalk and shaking my head, "No," while my knuckles turn white clinging to my backpack. All he says before driving off is, "Stay away from Christina." And then I never saw him again. Christina was one of my on-again or off-again friends in grade school, along with another girl who alternated between hating me and being buddy-buddy. I had completely forgotten about it after a while and went on being on again or off again with both of them. In 5th grade, the other girl invited me to the pop machine in the back hall at lunch. Cool, okay. Quality time with a girl I've known since I was a baby. Sure. We get back to the classroom and Christina tells me that people were playing with my lunch and hid my stuff, but she was nice enough to bring it back for me. I started drinking the pop I'd brought for lunch and something was really off. I spit it out and ran for the water fountain to rinse my mouth out. Turns out, Christina and her sister had topped up my drink with Lysol. If I drank much more, I probably would have been stupidly sick. The police were called, and a restraining order was put on both of them. It was delightfully ineffective, however, because the school was so small there was no separate class to put them in. They got 3- and 4-day suspensions. I have no idea if the two events are related, who that man was, or how he knew how bad Christina was at the time, but that memory sticks with me to this day. Story 3. Posted by Toby the Dog. Probably just my entire life would count as a disturbing, scary story. My mother and grandmother were always extremely protective over me as a child. I grew up forbidden to visit friends or family, walk down the street, go outdoors by myself, or even cook or drive. It got worse and worse as I grew older. I mean, I was 19 and my mother forbade me from having a job. She told me that I had everything that I needed right there with her. I didn't need money. I decided that enough was enough and saved up some money from doing laundry and finding change around the house, swiping what I could here and there, and I had to hide it well. She would steal it from me if she found it. She said that all money was hers and hers alone. I packed my bags one day and tried to leave. She actually tackled me to the ground and dragged me back inside with my grandmother's help, had my phone reported stolen and took it from me so that I couldn't make calls, and slept beside my bed to make sure that I didn't sneak away. She took me to a church meeting one day, holiness, and had the demons blessed out of me for 3 hours solid. No one would help me. She had them all convinced that I was nuts and needed help. She even recruited a cousin on my next attempt weeks later, when I actually got a bus ticket, to come and trick me into the car. Cousin told me that she was protecting me, helping me, but she wanted to talk to me, first shut the car door on me after I got in. It had a child safety lock on it. They drove me home and kept me isolated for a solid year before I could get help. Some of my relatives even parked their cars in the driveway for a while to keep me from leaving. Story 4. Posted by, Hey Look It's a Tyler. I was outside playing with friends one afternoon. We were around 9 or 10. We lived in a quiet area. As we were playing, we noticed a man in a truck drive by over and over again. Each time he passed my friend's yard, he would drive slowly. We then realized that this man was recording us with one of those old handheld recorders. It freaked us out. We ran inside their house and called his mom. She told them they needed to stay inside and that I should go home. I tried explaining that my mom wasn't home at the moment, but she still made me leave. I lived about a mile or 2 down the road. I've never ran so fast in my life. I was terrified that man was going to find me as I was running back home. When my mom found out what happened, she was super pissed off. My friend's mom hadn't allowed me to stay at their house until she could come pick me up. Story 5. Posted by Miles Kilo. I'd been living in my first apartment alone for maybe 2 weeks. It was a basement apartment, which meant cheap. And the windows were right at ground level, so you could see legs and shoes walk by. There were 2 bedrooms. I slept in one with the blinds closed, but the other room's window had some water damage, so I kept the blinds all the way up to let it dry out before maintenance came. That room had nothing in it but spare boxes from moving in. One night, I was asleep and then suddenly completely awake and alert. Every fiber of my being is suddenly on edge. I looked at my phone and saw it was around 4 a.m. I lay in bed for a minute before I turned towards my closed window and saw it. A large dark shadow of a person with a flashlight trying to see into my bedroom. I instantly freaked. I quietly grabbed a small hunting knife and stealthily moved to the hall so I could see into the other bedroom, the one whose window coverings were wide open. As I peeked around the corner, the person was scanning the floor of my bedroom methodically with the flashlight. They were big, had on heavy boots, and keys that jingled. At this point, as a single girl alone in a shitty apartment, I thought this was it. I was 100% prepared to take my little hunting knife and fight this fucker. My adrenaline was sky high. At that moment, my phone buzzed and I got a text from a friend on the police force who literally asked, "What's going on at your apartment?" I thought, yep, this is a bad guy. He's peering in my windows and is going to bust in any second now. But then he went away. I didn't hear from my police friend after I texted him back. I decided to go lie down on my bed and just wait to see what happened next. Not 5 minutes after lying down, someone knocked on my door with incredible force. The panic mounted again. Now, I have no peephole, no safety chain, just a deadbolt. At the top of my voice, in case it's a murderer, I want to wake people up, I yell, "Who is it?" I hear a meek voice reply that it is the police. My first thought is now that it is a clever plan to get a girl to open her apartment door. I stood there silently before I heard the voice say again that I wasn't in trouble. I opened the door a smidgen, ready to slam it, to see 2 cops, one backed away from the door and one up the steps. They must have seen my tiny little knife or something. They proceeded to apologize for scaring me. They were the ones looking in my windows. I yelled at them and possibly cried a little. The adrenaline finally broke, okay? I got the whole story from my friend the next day. Turns out a fellow resident of the apartment complex had gotten drunk, lost his keys, and broken into his own apartment to go to bed. They thought it was mine and were confused by the lack of broken windows. I was terrified at the time, but it's a good story now. Story 6, posted by Ms. Tibbs 13. I was around 11 years old and I woke up in the middle of the night to a man straddling on top of me with his hand over my mouth and nose. He told me to roll over and not scream. I rolled onto the floor and tried to scream bloody murder. I say tried cause when you are truly terrified it can take a second to find your voice. My mom heard me screaming and came in and fought with the guy. He was at least 6 foot, she was 5 feet 3 inches, and scared him enough with the fighting and screaming that he took off out the window he had come in through. Never did catch him. Story 7, posted by Merritt Moore. When I was a kid and lived in my old apartment, my mom befriended the downstairs neighbor and would often invite her over for coffee and tea because she was always so lonely. A few weeks went by without hearing from her, so we both went downstairs and knocked on the door. It was like a movie where when you knock the door slowly crept open, as if it had been this way for a while. We walked inside and found her in the bathtub covered in blood, and the smell was disgusting. Apparently, the lady's girlfriend left her, and she couldn't handle the pain. My mom's way of comforting me was, "Don't worry, Mark. She was our friend, so she won't haunt us. Gee, thanks, Mom." Story 8, posted by Faux Fox. Went to my aunt and uncle's house on a family vacation about 10 years ago. We drove from South Texas to some small town in Missouri, can't remember the name. We arrived there at 1 a.m. Family consisted of myself, 2 younger sisters, mother, and father. Most of the family was hungry from the long drive and wanted to see if a McDonald's was open. I was tired from the long car ride and wanted to stay at the house. Mom said one of my sisters would be staying as well. I settled down into the living room watching TV, slightly dozing off. I can remember hearing pitter-patter down the hallway and assumed my sister was just running around. She'd been eating sugary snacks the whole way up. I get a call from my mom asking what I wanted to eat, and in the background can hear both my sisters arguing. I hear a giggle somewhat behind me, stand straight up and look around. Nothing. I asked my mom if my sister ended up going with them, which she confirmed. I stood in the corner of the room till everyone got back. Story 9, posted by Oblivious Commenter. I was living in my car for a few months. I would just drive out of town and park off the side of the road on logging roads or whatever to sleep. Found this one place to park which was nice because it wasn't too far away, but also far enough that no one else would be there at night. First night I was there, I had a waking dream that someone was outside my car looking in. Freaked me out, but whatever. Parked other places for a few nights. Went back there for a few nights and had similar freaky nightmares both nights. Someone outside the car, trying to get in, etc. Basically said fuck this place and avoided it for a while. Was tired one afternoon and decided to go back to have a nap. Laid there for about 10 minutes before hearing a noise, and suddenly there's this other homeless dude walking his bicycle down out of the bush right past my car. I recognized him as someone who runs around picking bottles out of trash cans. Creepy as fuck. Guess he lived JN a camp in the bush right there. Story 10, posted by Unfocused Gaze. I once was woken up by someone saying my name and no one was there. I found out later it was a good thing. My boss just bought a little truck for my brother and I to use on occasion. We would load semi-trailers with pine seedlings that were boxed up. Now it was mid-December in Georgia and it had gotten into the 30s. We were told a trailer would be coming by to load at 6 a.m. Boss said it could be later, but to arrive early and just keep the truck running to stay warm and even sleep till it got there. He would still count the time. Well, we get to the tree farm. which is 3 miles from the house, and nothing is there, so we hunker down for some more sleep with the truck on. I start getting super sleepy and I fall asleep, and so does my older brother. I then start to faintly hear my name being called, and I try to answer, but I could barely move. My eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. All the while my name is getting called, kind of like when your mother wakes you in a loving way so as not to jostle you. I finally make a huge effort and open my eyes. The voice stops, and my body barely registers that I am demanding it to move. I finally got a hand on the door handle and opened the door. It took several attempts. I rolled out of the truck and just got on the ground on all fours weakly while leaning against the truck. It took a minute or two for my mind to finally clear and gain some strength. I turned the truck off and began to wake my brother up. It took longer than usual, but he did wake up. I then told him to go ahead and get some air. I looked around, but no one was there, except for us two. I began talking to him to tell him what happened, and apparently he had tried to crack a window open earlier, but I straight told him to close that fucking window. I don't remember ever doing that and told him so. I apologized for my outburst. The trailer showed up a little later and we loaded it. It warmed up to the 60s, so we drove home slowly with the windows down just to kill time. My boss later came and got the truck as he needed it elsewhere. A week passes by and I ask him where it was. He tells me it was in the shop getting a new exhaust. As it turns out, there was an exhaust leak and it was leaking into the truck cabin. Story 11. Posted by Cell 8. This happened recently. It was midnight. I was at the train station waiting for my train to arrive, and there was this really tall guy walking my way carrying a suitcase. As he came closer, I noticed he was struggling to carry the suitcase, as it looked rather heavy, and oddly enough, it was leaking some sort of liquid, not water, but it seemed more thicker. As this guy approaches, he orders me to take the bag. The tone of his voice was a little aggressive, and he didn't sound sober. Taking a closer look at him, I noticed his covered in dirt up to his face and cuts on his forearms. I said, "Sorry." Struck for words, I started to walk away. My train starts to arrive, and the guy follows me saying things I couldn't quite understand. I hop on the train. Door shuts. He is outside pointing at me, yelling more gibberish. Train slowly departs and suddenly punches the window in frustration with his eyes locked on me. Relieved I'm on the train, fellow commuters looking at me puzzled with all the commotion of me and that guy. Creeped me out. Story 12. Posted by Unknown. I once was woken up by someone saying my name and no one was there. I found out later it was a good thing. My boss just bought a little truck for my brother and I to use on occasion. We would load semi-trailers with pine seedlings that were boxed up. Now it was mid-December in Georgia and it had gotten into the 30s. We were told a trailer would be coming by to load at 6 a.m. Boss said it could be later, but to arrive early and just keep the truck running to stay warm and even sleep till it got there. He would still count the time. Well, we get to the tree farm, which is 3 miles from the house, and nothing is there, so we hunker down for some more sleep with the truck on. I start getting super sleepy and I fall asleep, and so does my older brother. I then start to faintly hear my name being called and I try to answer, but I could barely move. My eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. All the while my name is getting called, kind of like when your mother wakes you in a loving way so as not to jostle you. I finally make a huge effort and open my eyes. The voice stops, and my body barely registers that I am demanding it to move. I finally got a hand on the door handle and opened the door. It took several attempts. I rolled out of the truck and just got on the ground on all fours weakly while leaning against the truck. It took a minute or two for my mind to finally clear some and gain some strength. I turned the truck off and began to wake my brother up. It took longer than usual, but he did wake up. I then told him to go ahead and get some air. I looked around, but no one was there, except for us two. I began talking to him to tell him what happened, and apparently he had tried to crack a window open earlier, but I straight told him to close that fucking window. I don't remember ever doing that and told him so. I apologized for my outburst. The trailer showed up a little later and we loaded it. It warmed up to the 60s, so we drove home slowly with the windows down just to kill time. My boss later came and got the truck as he needed it elsewhere. A week passes by and I ask him where it was. He tells me it was in the shop getting a new exhaust. As it turns out, there was an exhaust leak and it was leaking into the truck cabin. Story 13. Posted by Fat Girl on a Date. This was a few months after I had moved into my house. I had a long weekend and I was at home just doing some cleaning and cooking. While my food was in the oven, I decided to go for a quick shower. I was drying off when I heard the beep, beep sound of my oven timer letting me know it was time to take the food out. I wrapped myself in a towel and went into the kitchen. I got the food out, started some sides going, and then went back to clean up in the bathroom and get dressed. When I walked back into the kitchen, I noticed that there was a small blood splatter on my white, tiled floor. Naturally, I freaked the fuck out. I whipped around and walked right the fuck out of the house because my mind was instantly filled with ideas of someone breaking in and cutting their leg on the broken window glass and then hiding out somewhere in my house waiting to rape and murder me when I least expected it. I called my then boyfriend to tell him that I thought someone was in my house. Something weird had happened in my house. He was at work and couldn't come. So I called my neighbor, told her the situation, and asked her to please come over for a while. She agreed that the blood spot was very strange, and together we grabbed knives and slowly creaked open the doors to the extra bedrooms and the closets. No one was there. At that point, I became convinced that they had to be hiding in the basement and starting shitting myself because my basement is huge and scary as fuck. We go down braced for the worst, but there's nothing there but boxes and spiders. After not finding or hearing anything strange, I calmed down, my neighbor left, and I cleaned up the blood. I told my boyfriend I was fine and tried to just go about having a normal day, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I didn't hallucinate the blood on my floor. It was really there. How the hell did it get there? Was there a bad guy somewhere close to my house? What happened? Did I have a mouse that jumped from the counter and injured itself when it hit the floor? A few hours later, I used the bathroom and noticed that I had started my period. I was really embarrassed and ashamed when I connected the dots and realized that when I squatted down to take my food out of the oven, I must have dripped a drop of blood onto the floor. Story 14. Posted by JT28. When I was 4 years old, my father, stepmother, and baby brother all died in a highway collision with a semi-truck. They parked on the side of Highway 84 in West Texas between Lubbock and Abilene. They stopped to check on the baby who was having a fit. The semi-driver had been over his hours and veered onto the shoulder and hit their car going downhill at about 70 miles per hour while they were stationary. No one but the semi-driver survived the ensuing damage and fire. Being 4, I hadn't been around him that much since my parents split, so I, to this day, don't have any recollection of him at all. But I ended up attending Texas Tech in Lubbock and consequently drove past the same spot on my way to and from DFW to Lubbock. I decided to research the incident and I found an article of someone who saw the accident and called for help. They lived in the house at least up until when the article was written and put on the internet. But they always described seeing the young family, my family, from the crash walking along the side of the highway, continuing their journey but never getting any close to their destination. Sadly enough, they were coming from Albuquerque to Houston to pick me up for a few months. I was actually at a loss when I found the story. I broke down, which was weird because I never knew this person. They're a part of me and I don't even know who this is. I attempted to find the spot of the accident by asking some locals who surprisingly remembered the incident from the late 90s. I was able to find the approximate spot, and I took a couple moments of silence while I was there just to show respect. It's one of the stranger stories I have. Edit. Thank you everyone for kind and inquisitive replies. This part of my life hasn't really left me looking for any answers, but it still leaves me with an empty feeling that's hard to describe. Always be safe driving, y'all, and never drive sleepy. This is just one accident my friends or family have been involved in dealing with, and always tell your loved ones just how much you love them every chance you get. Story 15. Posted by Consumptive Mary Jane. When I was 7 years old, I was walking to my babysitter's house all by myself. She only lived a block from the schoolyard. I'd done it all the time. This car pulls up beside me on the road, and the driver keeps gesturing to me to come closer and shouting, "Come here. Come here." I'm frozen on the sidewalk and shaking my head, "No," while my knuckles turn white clinging to my backpack. All he says before driving off is, "Stay away from Christina." And then I never saw him again. Christina was one of my on-again or off-again friends in grade school, along with another girl who alternated between hating me and being buddy-buddy. I had completely forgotten about it after a while and went on being on again or off again with both of them. In 5th grade, the other girl invited me to the pop machine in the back hall at lunch. Cool, okay. Quality time with a girl I've known since I was a baby. Sure. We get back to the classroom and Christina tells me that people were playing with my lunch and hid my stuff, but she was nice enough to bring it back for me. I started drinking the pop I'd brought for lunch and something was really off. I spit it out and ran for the water fountain to rinse my mouth out. Turns out, Christina and her sister had topped up my drink with Lysol. If I drank much more, I probably would have been stupidly sick. The police were called, and a restraining order was put on both of them. It was delightfully ineffective, however, because the school was so small there was no separate class to put them in. They got 3 and 4-day suspensions. I have no idea if the two events are related, who that man was, or how he knew how bad Christina was at the time. But that memory sticks with me to this day. Story 16. Posted by Wally Plums Ted. The time I was being stalked and harassed by a bunch of teen thugs in a car. I was about 12 or 13 years old. One time, I'm walking to my psychiatrist for my weekly appointment. It's a half-hour walk and after dark. I enjoyed walking, especially after dark when things were quiet, peaceful, and slow and no one else was around. No, I didn't live in a dangerous neighborhood, nor did my walk take me through any dangerous neighborhoods. As I'm about halfway to my destination, a car, a Cadillac, comes driving down the street. Some people, both male and female, in the car are sticking themselves halfway out the windows and are taunting me and jeering me as they drive by. A bunch of people in their late teens or early 20s. I ignore them and keep on walking. About a minute or two later, the same car comes down the street again, and those people are jeering me and taunting me again. I don't know who they are. Maybe they live in the neighborhood. I still ignore them and keep walking. Another minute or so goes by, and again, they come driving down the street, taunting and jeering me. Now I'm worried. They're circling the block over and over, deliberately focusing on me. As soon as they reach the corner and make their turn and are out of sight, I duck behind some bushes in someone's front yard and wait. The car comes again down the street. This time, not seeing me walking down the street, they're not jeering. They pass right by me in my hiding place and turn the corner. I think they think I've finally reached my destination, one of the houses on the block, and went inside and as a result, drove away. I thought wrong. Stupidly, I leave my hiding place and go back to walking on my way to my psychiatrist. I should have stayed there behind those bushes much longer because I heard the car approaching. They spot me and start taunting and jeering me again. They turn the corner. This time I ran towards my destination, but I know I won't get far before the car, and those kids catch up with me again. So, to that effect, I decided to hide again behind the bushes in front of an apartment building. This time resolving to stay there for good until the thugs in the car give up their searching for me. I'm hiding there behind the bushes for not long. Maybe about 30 seconds or so when the guy whose apartment it is pops out from his apartment, asking what I'm doing hiding in his bushes. At first, he probably thinks I'm a burglar or something, but I explain to him how I'm walking to my psychiatrist and how I'm being followed and harassed by a bunch of kids in a car, which is why I'm hiding in his bushes. The guy can instantly tell from the tone of my voice and my facial expressions that I'm telling him the truth. He can see how scared I am. Just then, the car comes down the street and pulls right up at the curb directly in front of us. They look at me and the guy I'm with. Not a mean-looking guy, in his late 30s, early 40s, but tough and serious-looking enough. He's not wearing a shirt, but he's wearing a sleeveless undershirt which reveals that this guy's upper body is very well-toned, slightly muscular, and no fat. I'm looking at the car and I realize that it's missing a few people inside. The car doesn't look so full now. The guy I'm with just gives them a mean stare. He asks me, "You know them?" I explain that no, I don't know them at all. I haven't the slightest idea of who they are. Just then, as the car is sitting there, about 3 of them approach walking from the other direction. The car was traveling east to west. Those 3 were walking on foot from west to east. So that's why the car seemed not so full. They were looking to escalate the situation. They were not satisfied with just driving by and taunting me. They changed tactics. A few of them got out of the car up ahead and started walking towards me, while the ones in the car took another turn around the block. Their plan now was to physically trap me in between themselves and their car. Perhaps grab me and drag me into the car with them for whatever reasons. But seeing my tough guy guardian angel with me, the kids walking towards the car instead got into the car and it took off. The guy offered to stay with me for a little longer, or if I wanted to duck into his apartment to stay there until I was sure that it was safe to continue on my journey. I had a feeling that this was the last I was going to see of those guys and their car, and I didn't want to be late for my appointment. So I thanked the guy for his offer, but declined, and decided to head on my way. The guy went back into his apartment and closed the door. I looked at the closed door and hoped that I didn't make a mistake by turning down the guy's offer of better safety because I was still scared. Thankfully, I was right about not seeing the car again. The rest of my walk, I was unmolested. I reached my psychiatrist's office. I told my therapist about what happened. He insisted on calling the police. The police came and took a report from me. That's the last I heard of it. On my way back home, I usually took the same route that I came from, up the same streets. But this evening, I varied my way home, taking some different side streets to walk on. Never saw that car or those thugs again. Here is, via Google Street Search, the very spot I hid. That door was the guy's apartment. That grassy area behind that low black metal fence on the left was where the bushes were that I hid behind. Back then the bushes in that spot were way tall, wide, and thick. Enough to hide a 12 to 13-year-old kid behind. If I hadn't ducked behind those bushes, I would have walked right into their trap, and God knows what they had in store for me once they had me trapped. Story 17. Posted by Unknown. This story happened at my old house in Toronto. 3 of us lived on the main floor of a house and a stranger lived in the basement. We didn't know much about the guy in the basement besides he was a big gamer and smoked a lot of weed. Almost every night I could hear him below me coughing up a storm as if he were about to die. I would hear this quite often and I began to realize this wasn't really directly below my room. He appeared to be coughing in a room under our garage. Sure enough, my roommate and I went to the garage and jumped up and down and could hear the hollow room below us. Eventually, this guy decided to move out, and we were able to move our friend into the basement. It would be our first time down there, and I was excited to see this weird room under the garage. Our friend took us into the laundry room, which was under my room, where we discovered a creepy little red door that led to a cement room filled with trash and old furniture. It was basically a dungeon. This is where he smokes weed every day. It was full of mold and seemed dangerous to breathe in the air. Not the exciting room we had hoped for. Our friend didn't understand our need to see the weird room because he was pissed off at the state of the apartment. I was surprised since it appeared the other guy moved out and our friend moved right in after a day. Not much time to clean. But then, my friend told me the guy had been gone for 2 weeks already and nobody cleaned it. I thought about this for a moment and immediately got a cold chill down my back. The last 2 weeks this guy was gone, I could still hear the horrible coughing coming from the creepy room. Story 18. Posted by Unlimited Anna. My parents sent me to live with my grandmother when I was 7. They had to work in another city for a couple of months while waiting for my big brother to finish middle school. I was ecstatic to live at my grandma's since she would spoil the hell out of me. She lived in a 2-bedroom house with 4 of my aunts and my uncle. However, 3 of my aunts and I slept piled into 1 bedroom while my uncle and grandma slept in the living room. The reason? One of my aunts was schizophrenic and had a whole bedroom to herself. My aunt had been crazy for years. My grandma wasn't the best at making her take her pills, and she would spend hours talking to herself and drawing with crayons on the wall. Looking back, it's creepy as hell. But as a child, I was having a blast living in a house where I was the most sane person around. This ended rather abruptly when I woke up with my crazy aunt pointing some scissors at my neck. The most plausible story is that she wanted to cut one of my hair strands, as she had picked this habit of cutting hair for a couple of months. However, we never knew for sure. Almost immediately my parents picked me up and moved to a very old house where earthworms came out of the toilet and shower drain at night. As a child, I thought I had woken to a living nightmare. Story 19. Posted by Lucero M. This happened just a few years ago, when I was still engaged in a trade many of you would frown on. I was a young and desperate man, and I guess if you are good at something and you enjoy it, you may as well make money from it. I never had any problem with most of my clients, I guess because I was solicitous and nice to the extreme, and also because I'm tall and built and can be intimidating if I have to. This is one of the darkest transactions I ever had. I've only played this particular game once, and only because the distinguished gentleman I was with was very persuasive. He may have put something in my juice or food though, because I felt very intense that time. I know you're not supposed to ingest or drink anything when in a stranger's house, but he came highly recommended by a friend, so I felt safe, and I was a bit hungry TBH. In any case, he certainly took me by surprise. After eating, when we entered his bedroom, I was curious because he had plastic sheets in his bed and a bit beneath it. When it comes to golden showers, P-play, usually one asks for it beforehand so I can drink lots of liquids, and the sheets are on the floor or rug. I thought perhaps he's OC and doesn't want any of the massage lotion or oil to seep into his bed. He got a big darkwood box and put it on a table beside the bed, between some candles. When I undressed him for the massage, I was a bit surprised. For such a rich gentleman, he had so many scars. Particularly in his torso, especially in the chest and back, but also in his upper arms and legs. I thought that was why he was offering more than the usual, because he was ashamed. The massage went on for an hour. After that, I was getting ready for the finish, getting on top of him and licking his neck while stroking him. He had other ideas, however. He opened the box and showed me the shiny things inside. And he told me what he truly wanted. He was damn persuasive. It was the only time I engaged in blood play, and it was a different high. I honestly would have run away screaming if he told me his fetish prior to meeting, but his timing was impeccable, and he played his cards well. It really stoked my fire that time, and I would have had another go at it if I were different. But it brought out some things in me that were disturbing. I guess I liked it too much? I dunno. He did say he was very turned on by my enthusiasm. I still think he drugged me. We were the only ones in his chamber, but the feeling that someone was watching us only increased as things got more intense. I wasn't freaked out at all though. If anything, it turned me on a lot. In the end, I was very handsomely rewarded for my services. I moved to a distant city shortly after that. When my friend contacted me about 3 months later, I told him I had already left. He told me it ain't important. It would be all expenses paid. We just have to agree on a sched. The offer was very tempting, and I was thinking of how that gentleman really goes for whatever it is he wants. I decided to decline, saying I've stopped and left it at that. My friend tried to sway me with better offers, at one point saying that the gentleman would be open to meeting me in my city. I always gave a blunt refusal. It was so very hard to say no. The money offered was considerable, but I have a certain instinct about these things, and I felt something very off, very wrong about it. In the end, they stopped. Story 20. Posted by Ian Juniper. Years ago, I used to work at a church as the head sound engineer. The bulk of that job required me to be active during the day for Sunday services. Occasionally, there were tasks that could be done whenever I got the chance. One of these tasks was duplicating CDs of sermons for people who would like a copy to listen to at home, in the car, etc. I would get requests for various sermons, sometimes series spanning months, and have to make extra time to fulfill them since it usually took quite a while. Since I am a night owl, oftentimes I would head to the church and take care of these duplication requests in the middle of the night. Never bothered me, and I had a key to get into the church whenever I needed to. One particular night, I headed into the church sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning. Since I knew the building like the back of my hand, I rarely turned the lights on inside the building. The ambient light from streetlights would illuminate through the windows just enough so that I could see where I was going, but beyond that the building was pitch dark. Now, the way this church was laid out was that there was a foyer, which then had doors into the church sanctuary where the services were held. The sanctuary had a balcony. On this balcony was the sound booth, where the CD duplicator was located. There is only one door to the balcony, which could be locked from the inside, which was also located in the foyer, with a staircase leading up to it. The balcony is completely open, not separated by glass or anything, and provides a completely unobstructed view of the sanctuary below, the pews, stage, all of it. Acoustically, the room is very good. If someone was on the stage talking, you could easily hear it from the back of the church and balcony. If for some reason you couldn't see what you were listening to, you could easily make out what part of the room the sound was coming from. This comes into play later. When I reached the top of the stairs to the balcony and the sound booth, I turned on a light so I could begin working. Just a single bulb about 15 feet above my head. I had no need to turn on anything more than that. This was the only light in the entire sanctuary. I know that might seem crazy to some, but this was a building I had spent hundreds of hours in by myself at night. I felt completely comfortable at the time. I began duplicating CDs, lost in my thoughts and the peaceful silence of the enormous room. After about an hour or so of silence, a sound abruptly rang out that startled me. About 20 to 30 feet ahead and below me, in the middle of the pews on the left-hand side, I heard a distinctive clink-clink sound. It was subtle but clear and unmistakable to me. Over and over. I knew exactly what the sound was. Let me explain. In another part of the church, we had a coffee house of sorts, where people would load up on coffee and donuts every Sunday morning. The coffee was always dispensed into ceramic coffee mugs, literally the most basic, commonly used mug you can imagine. Your kitchen cupboards are likely full of them. Anyway, due to the high volume of these mugs that circulated through the church, there were always baristas from the coffee house picking them up from around the church to be washed. Oftentimes they would miss mugs, however, and they would lay hidden around the church. As multiple mugs were usually collected in one hand, by the handle, mugs themselves would hit and make that distinctive ceramic clink sound. It became regular background noise before or during or after services. After about 10 years of working at this church, it's a sound I knew and recognized very well. But I would be lying if I said I ever consciously thought about that particular sound. So, I find myself trying to process why I'm hearing coffee mugs clink, ungy together in the middle of the night, in the middle of our church sanctuary, in the pitch dark. I stood there peering from the balcony into the darkness below, trying to make sense of it for several minutes before curiosity got the best of me. I had to figure out what was making that sound. I descended the stairs and into the foyer, where the light switches were, and flipped them all into the on position. I immediately felt a little better and entered the sanctuary on the ground level. I had pinpointed where the ceramic sound was coming from when I was on the balcony, but unfortunately now that I was at the source, with the lights on, there was nothing to be heard. It was midweek, but the sanctuary had not yet been cleaned from the previous Sunday, so I knew that there were probably a few coffee mugs still inside. People frequently left them on top of pews, underneath them, and everywhere in between. I walked down each row of pews, carefully scanning for mugs. Nothing. Knowing there would likely be some on the floor, I got down on my hands and knees in the very front of the sanctuary so I could take a peek. From this perspective, I could see underneath every pew on each respective side at once. Sure enough, there were a few mugs scattered throughout the floor, underneath certain pews. I got up and moved to those specific pews and examined where each mug was. In hindsight, I probably should have picked them up. I didn't, because technically it wasn't my job. But I did take note of the most important fact at the time. There were no coffee mugs in close proximity to each other. The closest was 3 or 4 feet from another mug, not even remotely close enough clink together. While I couldn't explain the sounds I heard, there was no logical way those mugs could have made those sounds. I had no answers, but I was satisfied enough to just brush it off. I left the sanctuary, turned off the lights at the light switch in the foyer, and returned back up the stairs to the balcony. Illuminated by just a single light bulb above me and consoled by the silence I found myself in once again, I resumed my tasks. About 15 minutes passed. Then it happened again. Clink, clink. In the same place as before. Clink. My heart stopped and the hairs on my neck stood up again. Clink, clink.
Okay.
I had verified this myself. There were no mugs in enough proximity that they could, somehow, for the sake of argument, be clinking on their own. They were not clicking on their own. I rushed down the stairs into the foyer and flipped on all the lights again. Entering the sanctuary, I dropped to my knees once more and peered under the pews. Nothing. I knew this sound. It was unmistakable. I pinpointed where it was coming from, but there was nothing. No sound. Nothing in disarray. No mugs that could be in any contact with each other. Spooked, but frustrated at the same time, I returned to the foyer. Instead of turning off all the lights, I left one on in the sanctuary. This made for 2 lights now, one in the balcony and one in the sanctuary. The addition of this light helped set me a little more at ease as I walked through the balcony door at the bottom of the stairs. I locked it from the inside. I don't know what was going on, and maybe I was being a little paranoid at this point, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I went up the stairs, once again, to attempt to finish my tasks on the balcony. About half an hour of silence had elapsed, just enough for me to settle into the idea of nothing weird happening for the rest of the night. Then it happened again. Clink, clink. Might as well have been a gunshot. I stood up and scanned from atop my balcony. There was twice as much light in there now, and enough to illuminate the room even if it was still dim. But there was nothing. Nobody was playing a prank. There were no ghouls, specters, or shadow people dancing around. No big aha revelation. Clink. It continued. And so did I wanted to go home. So I ignored it. The sooner I finished duplicating these stupid CDs, the sooner I could get out of this damn church and get some sleep. Clink, clink, clink. Again and again. Maybe another 15 minutes. Maybe another half an hour or so. I lost track of time. All I know is that eventually it stopped. The silence returned. At one point, I resolved that all this was ridiculous. There had to be a rational explanation, and as such, it was stupid to hold up on my locked balcony. I went downstairs to get something to drink. On my way back, I flipped off that remaining light in the sanctuary. No need to waste electricity, I reasoned. I am not going to let some stupid sound dictate fear all night. I returned to the balcony and left the door unlocked. Illuminated once more by my single light bulb, I popped in a few more CDs. Then it happened. I don't even know how to effectively describe it, at least in a way that captures the immediacy and sheer terror of it. All at once, the entire room began to shake violently with a deep, bass-Y rumble. There are no earthquakes in this part of the country, so that was immediately ruled out. Time seemed to stop as I scanned around trying to figure out what was going on. I looked at the soundboard. You know those LEDs they have going from green to yellow to red? The thing was maxed out in the red, indicating it was overloaded by some sort of input. But there were no mics plugged in, no amps turned on, and no sound coming out of the speakers. I don't even think the speakers were plugged in, and if they were muted. At the time, I had done professional audio for over 5 years, and this wasn't something technical. The entire sanctuary rumbled and shook, and in about 30 seconds it stopped. Complete silence. I was completely shaken, and I bolted out of the church and went home. I don't have any explanation for what happened. Since there were no ghostly things to show themselves or anything super paranormal, I have tried to explain it with logic. But alas. Story 21. Posted by Colorful Parrots. Years ago, I stayed for some nights at a hotel in the New Forest, which is a national park on the south coast of England. The hotel was a large former hunting lodge built sometime in the 19th century. I felt very uncomfortable in my room and almost as though there were others there with me or someone watching me. I am not the kind of person that is normally given to such feelings, but they were very strong and extremely uncomfortable. I was with a large group staying there and speaking to others after the first night many felt the same. That first night, it took me a long time to fall asleep, and for the first time in my entire adult life, I could not bring myself to turn out the lights before I went to bed. When I eventually fell asleep, I had the most vivid dreams that felt extremely real, of being in a trench somewhere during the Great War and hearing the constant banging of explosions and of artillery pieces firing. I woke up feeling extremely distressed and with a cold sweat. There was a banging noise which I assume must have been some metal roofing not affixed properly moving in the wind. I've never felt anything like it since and had never felt anything like it before. It felt so very real and I was completely overwhelmed with so many emotions and utterly terrified. I couldn't get back to sleep. I felt like I was in the company of others. I felt like someone was near, or that feeling you get when you know people are looking at you, and I spent the rest of the night in a kind of daze. In the morning, I went downstairs for breakfast and saw a frame on the wall containing some photographs and a story about how the hotel was converted to a military hospital during World War I. I did not know anything about this before I arrived and before that night. I had also not been reading anything about the war or had seen anything on television recently about it. I'm a practical and skeptical woman, but I don't know what to make of that experience. I spent the remainder of the stay with one of my friends in another room. The oppressive atmosphere and general feeling of something wrong and frightening to me did not lift, and my friend I stayed with was also afraid and was glad of me to stay with them in their room. Story 22, posted by Unknown. I went to Mongolia with a few friends when I was 17, and I was the oldest of the group. One night, my friend and I woke up to a man screaming his head off right outside our second-story window. My voice is getting hoarse because you think you're gonna die screaming. It went on for hours, and we had no idea what to do. Eventually, I got up to close the window, and when I looked outside, terrified this dude was going to see me, there's no one there. I shut the window, and the screaming stopped immediately. What's worse, our friend who was in the room connected to ours didn't hear a thing, and neither did the other group of friends in a different room on the same floor. The only ones who heard it were me and my friend who I was sharing a room with. Okay, whatever. Creepy, but nothing bad happened to us, and now it's all over, right? Wrong. So that night, I'm like, I am not getting woken up again. I don't care what loud noises people decide to make. I put my earplugs in. I got my eye mask on. Life is good, and I sleep through the night. The next morning, my friend in the room connected to ours comes into my room and says, "The police were here last night." Me, thinking I didn't hear her right. What? Her. Someone knocked on our door and I ignored it, but they knocked again, so I answered and it was the police. They walked into your room, looked around and left. Because I was wearing earplugs, I slept through the whole thing. What makes this terrifying to me is that we were in a foreign country. We have no idea what the police uniforms look like or what they're allowed to do. Again, we escaped unscathed, but sometimes I shudder to think what might have happened if it had just been someone pretending to be police. Story 23, posted by Fizzy Lemon. When I was moving out to New Mexico, I ended up driving exceptionally late through reservation territory. Those are stories for another time. I want to share about the Silver gas station. It's clear, near cloudless, and roughly 2 a.m. I've been driving for days cross-country, and I'm used to the little run-down gas stations of backroad counties. In fact, that's what I'm looking for. I have the windows down as I drive, and I'm singing along to whatever is playing on the radio when I see a big, blue sign lined in silver that says, gas station. No brand.
No logo.
Still, the asphalt is that brand new black and the 4 pumps look immaculate. The interior is brightly lit, and I can see an employee inside behind the counter when I pull into park. I hurry inside out of the dark and I freeze. Some sense knows that there's something wrong here, but I can't make out what it is. To this day, I couldn't tell you what that employee looked like. I can tell you there are 2 shelves of candy, chips, and junk food in the middle. The linoleum floor is so polished I can see my reflection. The walls are stark white. Everything smells of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol, like a hospital rather than a gas station. There's a single cooler of soda and Arizona iced tea and water bottles. The employee greets me with too much enthusiasm for 2 a.m., and I tell them I need to use the bathroom. They unlock the bathroom door, the only door other than the entrance, and it's even cleaner than the store. I'm as quick as I can, and when I leave they're standing just outside as if they're waiting for me. I remember them smiling, and they seem to have trouble finding the words, "Is there anything else I can help you with, ma'am?" I say I'm going to browse, and they go to stand unmoving behind the counter. I grab a Coke, a Rice Krispie treat, and a candy bar. When I pay, they stare at the items and ask me, "Is $2.80 right?" I give them cash, let them keep the change, and run to my car. They watch me from the big glass window, unblinking and smiling. 8 months later, I go back the same way and figure I'll stop at the same gas station. It won't be so creepy in the daytime, right? Of course, there's no gas station there. I asked around 2 towns about it, and everyone assured me there's no gas station there. I made it sound like I was planning on when to stop for gas and was told if I stopped there, I'd be in the middle of nowhere. So that's fun. Story 24. Posted by Kygrin. I was about 11 when this happened. I slept in the loft room with my 2 cousins. They had both fallen asleep and I was on my iPad when I heard a banging noise. We had left the door leading to the stairs open since my cousin cried that it was too dark otherwise. I went up to the wall where the stair was. Noise was coming from there. I tried to ignore it, and 10 minutes later my uncle came upstairs looking at the wall really confused. We both doubted it was our neighbors, since they were an elderly couple in their 90s. The woman was deaf and her husband was legally blind. I've heard this sound multiple times before, but always on the other side of the house, and it was just our neighbor's teenage son having a flipping toddler tantrum. The sound stopped eventually, thought nothing of it, and fell asleep. Few days later, the couple's granddaughter comes over, finds her grandparents dead in their bedroom. No blood or anything. They were in bed. My family assumed they died in their sleep. No idea how they died. Nobody told me. Scared the shit out of me for the next few weeks. Story 25. Posted by 88ball. Well, when I was in college, my upstairs neighbors were like the perfect couple. Both very calm, polite and happy, never had any problems with them. But then this night came. It was a weekend, and I had my girlfriend to sleep over. We went to bed pretty early, being afterwards awakened by some recurring noises of something hitting another thing, like a punch in the wall or in someone. We thought it was nothing and tried to sleep again, but it went on, and to this hitting were added some angry screams, which we could not comprehend, looking a lot like a fight, with a male and female voices. It was pretty horrifying, and we didn't know if we should go check what was going on, especially thinking that the woman was, at the time, pregnant. Things were so intense that we felt the ground shaking every time there was a hit. As we weren't yet so sure what was happening, we tried once more to sleep hoping that we misunderstood everything. To our surprise, the most strange thing that night was yet to come. My cell phone started to ring pretty late, but it wasn't my ringtone. The music player opened by itself and started to play a song named "Don't Stay Here" by the band Frames, which I had saved in the memory card. My girlfriend got pretty scared by this, so I tried to play cool about it, saying it was just a coincidence and that I was going to lock all the doors just to make her feel safe. Actually, I did that because I was also scared as hell. I don't remember exactly how things went after that, but I guess the noises got less frequent and not as loud as before, or even ceased at all. After that day, I didn't see the couple for some time, but when I finally crossed with them in the building, they seemed all right. Never asked any questions, and never learned what happened upstairs on that strange night. Story 26. Posted by OKCoat. Please note I am a young, small female, and this happened a while ago when I was a teenager, home alone in my childhood home. I lived in quite a good neighborhood, so crime wasn't really an issue. A lady walked up the driveway of my childhood home while I was home alone and tried to open a little door underneath my house. I heard her doing this from my room and didn't see her, so I assumed it was my neighbor. I knew it was a woman because I could hear that she was quite light on her feet. She then proceeded to walk around to the back of my house. I wasn't really worried at this point because my neighbor had previously borrowed my ladder, so I just assumed she was giving it back to us. However, this woman was not my neighbor. At this point, I didn't realize this person wasn't someone I knew, so I put my headphones back on and forgot about it until a few days later. Context: I have a cubby house from when I was little at the back of the garden. There is a window that faces my house which I painted at some point. About a week later, I was getting back from doing something with my mom at about 3 p.m. on a weekend. We enter my childhood home through the back door rather than the front, so I can see the cubby house. The painted window is open slightly, and to my horror, so is the door, which can't open by itself. My mom and I investigate, and there's a bag sitting in the cubby house which is basically empty. Carefully we look through it, and there's about 10 different IDs, etc. We told the police and handed the bag in at the station. They didn't have record of those people on the IDs. What they suspected was that this lady, who they know quite well for various crimes or scams, decided to stay in my old cubby house for some time, keeping an eye on our movements while she was somewhere to stay. She dumped her bag there that had some of her scam victims' cards so that she didn't get caught. My mother and I were also a victim of one of her scams a few years prior to the bag incident. This lady scams people by jumping in front of their cars, forcing them to stop and telling them she's a victim of domestic violence, which might be true. She then hops in their cars and steals their wallets. Or if she's unable to steal their wallets, she will beg people for money by forcing her way into their car, initially forcing them to drive her to the hospital and then try to emotionally manipulate them into doing things for her. Luckily, my mother's bag was in the front of the car, so she wasn't able to take the wallet. She decided in order to get money she needed us to take her to the hospital, which of course my mother said yes to, as we thought she was a victim of domestic violence at this point. A block or so later, she said she needed us to give her money for a bus ride and then for her child's medicine, and that we had to take her to her house. That short and yet excruciatingly long journey cost us about $50 as she kept demanding more and more. Of course, we gave it to her as she was in our car and we didn't know what she was capable of. When we dropped her off, she said we had to pick her up again in 10 minutes to take her to the shopping center, which was literally only a few blocks away. As soon as she closed the door, we sped off. Needless to say, we didn't go back. Story 27. Posted by Ray Boy. I live in the Philippines, by the way. 2 years ago, I was going home with my family at around 10 p.m. We were in my father's car, which was a pickup. Me, being the shady kid I was, forced my dad to allow me to stay at the back portion exposed to the night air. My dad wanted me to stay inside because it was dark out, but since I let out a small tantrum, he made me stay out. However, he asked my cousin to stay outside with me. While driving back, we passed by a section where the curb was significantly higher. When we passed by that section, I saw this girl. I'm not actually sure if it was a lady. She was wearing pants and a black and white long sleeve. She sat on the curb with her head face down and her arms wrapping around her legs. Now I would think it's weird if she did that in the morning with her friends, but she was alone at 10 p.m. I was shook, but I shrugged it off thinking it was just some edgy teenager. However, when we passed her, I heard this blood-curdling scream coming from her direction. It sounded like multiple people screaming at once, and it really caught me off guard. I looked at my cousin calmly and asked her if she heard that, but inside, I was so freaked out. I thought no one else heard it, but I felt the car go faster after the scream, so I knew the people inside heard it. When we arrived home, I literally bursted with fright. My father said it probably came from the car that went by us during the scream. It definitely wasn't from the car because I heard it from the right side, where the girl was, and the car passed our left. I told them about the girl to our right, but they basically didn't comment at all, like they were ignoring me. I was pretty freaked out and still have no idea where the hell that scream came from. Story 28.
Post-it B. Vaca del Muerte.
I was maybe 22 and my little brother and I were renting a house in a pretty bad neighborhood in Athens, Georgia. The house should have been condemned. Really old and no AC with spiders living in the AC ducts, but we were both broke and so it was all we could afford at the time. Our landlord was extremely shady and we would randomly come home to find him inside the house. Well, it was summertime in Georgia, so having no AC was a death sentence, so we bought 2 window unit ACs, and both slept in the living room on air mattresses, so we would only have to air condition one room. We were both sleeping in the living room when I woke up at around 3:30 a.m. and happened to look towards my feet. There at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the streetlights, coming through the blinds of the huge living room window was a tall, thin man in a suit and wide brim hat. I couldn't make out his face as it was all in shadow, but I could see he was smiling and his eyes were glowing with a pale blue light. I said, "Nope," and rolled over to look away from what I was sure was a ghost, and he was instantly next to me, directly in my face, and had this wide toothy grin on his face. I jumped back and yelled for my brother to wake up. There's a ghost in our house, and he just kind of rolled over and told me to go back to bed. I look back and the hat man is gone. I sat outside on the front, stooped the rest of the night smoking. We moved out maybe a month later, and I never saw him again after that night. Not yet anyway, but I am always worried he'll come back.